So welcome to Transform Gov, where we share real-life stories about how technology and data are changing the way we experience public services, how they're designed, and also how they're delivered. So in every episode, we talk to those who are right at the source, that is the leaders who are making the calls, and of course the teams who are getting it done. Transform Gov is part of the eGovernment Awards and is brought to you in partnership with Accenture. And my name is Maeve Kneafsey. Just a quick note before we get into this interview, this episode. Entries are now open for the 2026 Ireland eGovernment Awards. So please register early, get yourself online and get your name and everything in there. You can then continue with your saving it and coming back to it until the closing date, which is the 22nd of May. So where you'll find all the information is digitalgovawards.com. So remember, register early and work away on it at your leisure, and it'll give you a chance to get all your information together. So today we're looking at a project in the health space, and one that tackles a very sensitive issue and a very important issue around the public service. So we're joined by Ailish O'Neill, who is from the National Suicide Prevention Office in the HSE, whose team developed Let's Talk About Suicide programme, which was the winner of the 2025 Ireland eGovernment Education Award. So this is a digital learning programme designed to help people recognise the signs of suicide and distress and to feel confident stepping in to help, whether that's a professional role or whether it's in everyday life. So Ailish, you're very welcome to Transform Gov.
Thank you, Maeve. Delighted to be here.
Good. Well, look, let's start at the beginning. It's very good.
Yeah.
We've heard that before in The Sound of Music. What was the problem you were trying to solve when you kind of started with Let's Talk About Suicide?
Yeah. So I'll bring you back. So 2019, COVID-19, 2020. So under our National Suicide Prevention and Self-Harm Strategy, we have a suite of training programs in the area of self-harm and suicide prevention that we deliver, Maeve. And all of those training programs are delivered face-to-face. So they're delivered to communities, professionals right across the country, nationwide. So in 2020, we found ourselves in a position where under the COVID regulations, we weren't in a position to deliver face-to-face training. So what that meant was we had to very much quickly realign and repurpose some of our training programs for delivery in the virtual classroom. But I suppose also what that did was that gave us pause to think about, well, we don't actually have a self-directed learning program in this space. We don't have that general introduction online training program that would allow people to touch into this subject. And as you mentioned there, like it is a very sensitive subject. So if we think internationally, there aren't lots of e-learning or digital learning programs on the topic of self-harm and suicide prevention. And there's a rationale and a reason for that, because you have to really think about how do we approach a subject like this through self-directed learning? How do we do it that we invite the learner into the space in a very safe, in a very protected, but in a very empowering way. So this was the position we found ourselves in. We said, well, we have a gap here in terms of our suite of education and training programs. So how now are we going to plug that? So we recognized we needed to develop we needed to develop a digital learning program on the topic of suicide prevention for the general population.
And in terms of, so is this designed for the general population, or is it for professionals who are trying to help people? I mean, is it both?
Both. And that's a really good question, isn't it? Because so from our perspective, when we look at the suite of programs we have, they're tiered, and they're tiered based on the individual's profession and their role. So if you work in mental health services, the likelihood of you engaging with somebody in suicidal distress is much higher than perhaps if you're a volunteer coach in a GA club or in a soccer club, but it might happen. And in everyday life, there isn't a psychiatrist in every corner, but there's a human being in every corner. And we talk about that we grow up and we live, we work, we grow, we play in our communities. And the people who are around us are the people in those communities. So how then do we empower people to understand how they can have a role in suicide prevention? So it has been developed for the everyday member of the public over 18 years of age.
Okay. I mean, look, I know that in this space I used to be involved with an online resource for young teenagers in terms of where they were going under difficult times, called Reach Out. But the challenge is that sometimes, although people are more aware of it, they're even more nervous that they're going to make things worse, isn't it? You know, that's the sense. So better almost, I'm going to say something wrong, so I say nothing, which is, it's terrible. People want to be empowered.
Yeah.
So I presume, you know, that's what you were finding. So what kind of gaps were you identifying then, and what was there? What were you realising you had to work on?
So I think you've just said it there. So broad sweep, you know, if we look at a population. So suicide was only decriminalised in Ireland in 1993. So that's not that long ago, okay? So there is a very significant proportion of the population that have grown up with the understanding that suicide is illegal or suicide was a mortal sin. So it was thinking about, okay, so this is a broad sweep piece that we want to do. So there's a few pieces we want to do here in this program. And how are we going to do it? How are we going to challenge stigma? How are we going to challenge the myths that exist around the topic of suicide? So like you've just said, people are terrified actually of this subject. So how then do we bring people into this space? How do we support people to understand that actually we all have a role in this space? So that's one of the first things, is our stigma and challenging our stigma. And then I suppose one of the existing myths or predominant myths that we have around the topic is, you know, if I say the word, now I've put the idea in somebody's head.
Or I've labelled them.
Or now I'm responsible, you know. Whereas what we know from all of the evidence and from lived experience experts who share their story with us, that actually when we talk directly and we ask directly about suicide and we use the word, what we're doing is we're giving people permission to tell us exactly what it is they're experiencing. So we were thinking, okay, so how are we going to capture this now in a digital learning program? How, when we know one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people is asking that question, how are we going to address that and how are we going to look at it? And I think the other thing for us that we were really aware of was this has to be rooted in reality, right? This has to be tangible for people. So if we're looking to develop this digital learning program, it has to, if somebody's engaging in it, they have to feel like, okay, this is real life. And so for us, it was like, well, the answer is it needs to be real life. So we need to have those lived experience experts. We need to detail stories. We need to detail scenarios that are rooted in real life lived experience.
And when you say lived experience expert, what does that mean?
So a lived experience expert is somebody who has had their own experience of suicidal crisis and has been in that position, but has recovered and can live now and is living a very fulfilling life, but who can share with us their actual own experience and can share with us what helped them on their journey to recovery. And equally, what didn't help them on their journey to recovery.
And then I'm just thinking about the digitization side of this. I can imagine this is a very hard brief to write. So did you figure out exactly what it was you wanted? Or did you say, we're going to have to engage with some technology experts to try and figure out what we can do? Or how did you work that? So
for us, we're subject matter experts, okay? So we have a very strong sense around what it is we needed to achieve. So how do we present the subject? How do you ask the question? How do you support somebody if they say yes? What's your role? What do you do next? But for us, we were very clear around the process, Maeve, but what we weren't very clear on was, well, now, how do we harness technology to do that? Like, what does that look like? What does that look like, right? So if we're bringing this learner on this digital journey, how do we do that?
Because the flow can be critical, can't it?
Absolutely.
If it's clunky in any way.
Absolutely. So we want to keep them with us. And for us, I think it was really important when we were thinking about this. So it might be me, an everyday, I'm a coach and I want to log on because I want to get more experience. It's recommended I do this as part of my role. It could be the mum who at 2:00 in the morning is really worried about her son, you know? So we had to think about all of these audiences and we had to think about, well, how are we going to bring them into this space? Again, I come back to this tangible way where they really feel that this is something that's relative to them. And on completion, that they feel empowered or they have a competence now or a knowledge or not a skill set to know what to do. And talking and working with the digital experts and the partners that we had, it was thinking about, well, how let's harness that lived experience piece.
And who are your partners?
So Orion Learning.
Okay.
Orion Learning were the digital partners that we worked with on this. And I think, so they had a real expertise.
Mm-hmm.
We had a real expertise. And there was this forming and storming.
How are we going to overlap one another?
How are we going to do this? Because, they had an expertise in that learner journey. And I suppose for us, we were thinking about, well, we can't necessarily maybe follow that particular journey because this is a very nuanced subject. And, there was this real light bulb moment for us all when we recorded some of those lived experience stories and our...
which I'm sure were in some ways really moving.
Absolutely.
An eye-opening for the team, all the team.
It's such a privilege to sit in a room with somebody and for them to feel, I want to share my story because I want the person who's coming after me to have a better and a different experience to what I had. It's such a privilege for somebody to share that of themselves and to give that to us. And so they did. And it was just this light bulb moment where I think for our partners, Orion Learning, we are absolutely committed in this. We know now. We know what we're trying to do. So it really solidified our relationship. And I think also for us as part of that process, it's really important. We're inviting these individuals to share their story. So it's not a case of we want to parachute you in. Wonderful, you've told our story, now leave. So they were part of the whole process. They were part of recording their story. They signed off on material. They helped shape how the information or how the program was going to flow. So it was really about ensuring that we had this real partnership approach. And it just made such a significant difference. It was just that real light bulb moment when you're talking about a very sensitive and nuanced subject.
And I suppose from the technology side of things, it's always an enabler. I know we know that. But the point is the people who are using the technology for you and on your behalf, they suddenly were part of the journey as well, weren't they? Because they had to say, okay, well, this is not just, here's a cookie cutter, off we go. That's how it's always worked. They were involved in evolving it.
Absolutely, right? And I think that's where, we could see we have this level of expertise, you have this level of expertise. How are we going to bridge those pieces? And that's what it was. It was bringing that lived experience into the space. So where we're all now, we have a common purpose here. This is what we're working to do. We're working to bring that story into a digital learning space where we can empower people when they log off to say, okay, I know now what I'm going to do.
Okay, I think it's a good time to take a break because I want to get into some of the nitty-gritties of actually what the guys did. But we have to say hello to our partner, Accenture, so give us a moment and we'll be back to you soon.
Through the power of cloud, data and AI, Accenture is helping the public sector by blending human ingenuity, technology and a delivery-focused culture to turn their ambitions into action. Be ready for any challenge by adopting a continuous reinvention mindset to deliver human-centric services that adapt and grow with your needs. Contact the team at Accenture to find out more.
So we're back now with Ailish O'Neill from the National Suicide Prevention Office, and we're just talking about their online learning resource that they have won an award for, so it's very special. But I want to talk about the more practical elements of actually doing the work. So try and bring it down to kind of tangibles. So did you use things like scenario building? I know you interviewed individuals themselves, but give us a sense of the actual practical process.
Yeah. So it's thinking about, so we needed to capture stories, and we needed to capture stories that were, I keep using this word, but that were tangible and real, because that's really important. We have to give an authenticity to the material. So it was taking the stories from our lived experience experts and thinking about and working with our partners to think about, well, how do we do this? How do we present these stories? And we recognize it's through those dramatizing those scenarios. So really presenting the scenario on camera, presenting the engagement between two everyday individuals and who we would use a range of scenarios and a range of relationships within those scenarios. So modeling best practice. So it was taking a scenario, modeling best practice, pulling out the key learning points that we wanted to identify. So those would include like, what are the signs? How do I ask the question? When I ask the question, if a person says yes, what do I do then? And how do I signpost and who do I signpost onto? So it was presenting the best practice tool. And I think that was something as well on working with the digital partners was really interesting, because when we're looking at a subject like this, so often when you're looking at those digital learning experiences and looking at different offerings in terms of a reply or an answer to a particular question that's posed, you'll have one that's incorrect. We couldn't do that, right? We were never going to present something that was the wrong answer. So it's thinking about, well, how do we incrementally build on the learning then? What are the different realistic responses that people might give? So it was about presenting those scenarios and then bringing the learner on a journey where they're now the individual who's undertaking that intervention. So they're walking through a different scenario, they're walking through a different dramatized situation, and they're presented with options. So it's about them thinking about the learning, exploring, thinking about, what's the best option here, and giving them a variety to choose from. But one of the really key tools that we built into the program was giving a space for the learner to actually practice recording themselves, asking, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about ending your life? Because right. So that's the real jarring point for people, because it's not something we do as part of our everyday narrative. We don't talk about suicide in that way. And that's absolutely fine. So then suddenly, if you're in a situation and it's the first time you're going to articulate or use those words, that can be really, really challenging for people. So building in that recording function and what the function is there so that people can hear themselves back. And the feedback that we've gotten is that is, I suppose, one of the most significant learning tools that people have said, because they would never, they said even, practicing or saying the word, it would have jarred with them. So it's a very powerful tool to have built into the program. And then in turn, it was around bringing the person on to the next part of their journey. So signposting. But again, working with our digital partners on that, we thought about, we're nosy in Ireland, right? So you've presented this scenario, but what happened next? We want to meet this person 3 months later or 2 months later,
because also it's believing that what they're learning is actually effective.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a very clever addition, and it wasn't necessarily originally part of our brief, but it was a suggestion from our learning partners, was to build that piece in, because suddenly we're hearing the next part of the story. So we're understanding where did that initial conversation lead that person. And again, if what we know from the evidence and what we know from lived experience experts is that initial disclosure, the response that you receive on that initial disclosure, that can really significantly impact your next steps in the journey that you take. So it was really trying to harness that and share that information with our everyday member of the public.
And in terms of, difficult parts of the work and just actually making this happen, what were the particularly difficult elements?
So, one thing which if I was back again, we would embed, and it's a learning, I suppose, going forward. So typically when people complete the program, so people enroll, about 80% of people go on to complete the program fully. 20% of people don't, so they fall off. So we don't know where they fall off. So for me, that's a real learning in terms of this whole
tracking
digital space. Right, exactly. So building in that tracking as we're developing the module, developing the digital program. So we know, because there might be a particular point, and I suppose our ambition is that we want to continue to revise, develop and advance this space. So it will be something that we will be looking to embed going forward. But it is that piece, how do we capture, where are we losing that 20%? And how do we adjust that or tweak what it is that we have? So that is a key one. And I think as well, just reflecting on, because of the subject, Maeve, because of the topic, there is a space where you have to bring the experts who are have an expertise in a different, you have to bring them on this journey with you, right? So we have to do that. And for me now, it's understanding, it doesn't really matter how much I say, okay, yeah, like wonderful, I can say X, Y, or Z, but no, let's actually hear from the lived experience expert.
Yes.
Let them tell the story. Let them communicate the why. Let them communicate the how and what made the difference. So yeah, those are two key pieces for me in terms of the importance of that lived experience piece to inform that journey and the nuances around it in terms of that digital space, and then capturing and tracking that user on that journey as well.
And did you ask the lived experience individuals who contributed to actually go through?
Oh, absolutely.
The entire program.
Yeah. They supported our launch. They were wonderful. So they've gone through it. They have endorsed it. They continue to endorse it. They continue, actually, they've come on to other projects. Yeah. So they very much were start to finish. Here we go. What are your thoughts? And being involved from that perspective. Yeah.
And in terms of mechanisms, did you use customer journey mapping to try and, because I'm just aware that there could be very different journeys.
Yeah.
And it's a way of you seeing where the nuances might lie.
No, is the answer to that. But I think that's something now that we have a template to work from. That's what we will intend to do, because I think we need to put it's supporting people on that journey when the topic is suicide. It's challenging for people, and particularly sometimes when you want to engage, you'll have people who absolutely want to feed in, and they're shaped by their personal experience, and sometimes, and that piece is really important, but you also want to get this whole other cohort here who, how do we support people to understand that this can be, it's a little bit like first aid, right? So we have a role, how do we do our compressions? How do we do our breaths? How do we support that population-based response to understand what your role is? So I think that's something that we really want to draw on now as we advance in this space and develop in this space.
And in terms of, things like language and tone, and was that a really tricky part? Because nuances.
Massive, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I presume there's cultural challenges, and now that we are quite a diverse community.
Yes, yeah, but I can't tell you how much we agonized over language and over script and because we're modeling best practice here. So absolutely is the answer, yes. So there was a lot of time spent, and that was really with the subject matter expert group within the National Office for Suicide Prevention, that team. And that was about testing that with different partners, Maeve, and, bringing in that expert lens, bringing in that clinical lens, ensuring that we had that sign off, that we were hitting the right notes. But there were kind of key pieces. So when we started this project and we were setting it out, we were like, there's one key note, there's one key piece that needs to come through this program. And our lived experience experts were really strong on this. It has to communicate a sense of hope. So it had to be realistic and weighted in real life experience, but it had to communicate a sense of hope. So how do we do that? What's the language that we use? And furthermore, how do we validate people's experience? So what is the language that we use to do that? And our one line that really stuck with me from one of our lived experience experts was, she said, I think one of the most important things you can do for somebody who's in this space is listen to understand, don't listen to respond. Right? So
that's I totally get that.
So, yes. that was the piece where we were like, right, that's what we need to model. That's what we need to model through the tone, through the language, through the pace of how we're bringing the learner through this. And it's one of those lines, I think, that has really stuck with me and that I've robbed from her and used lots because she just nailed it. Yeah.
And look, in terms of, I can't believe we're nearly at the end of the podcast. It feels like we just talked for 2 minutes, right? But in terms of usage, are you finding it's increased dramatically? Are you getting good feedback?
Yeah. So we when we launched in 2024, over 6,000 people completed the program. Over 9,000 completed it in 2025. What year are we in? And we've had over 3,000 completed so far. So then if we're talking about, generally speaking, our face-to-face community-based programs, on average in a year, you're probably going to have about 16,000 people completing those. So we are seeing that increased reach with regards to it. Because what it does is it's accessible, right? It's an accessible platform. It's an engaged platform that people can actively utilize on their phone or their desktop or wherever they might be. And we have had it independently evaluated through the National Suicide Research Foundation, which is based in UCC. And the feedback that we've got from it is that it increases knowledge and it increases confidence and competence to be able to interact with somebody if they are in distress. So it really is that starting point. And I suppose for us, what we're hearing from people is it's challenging and breaking down stigma.
I suppose the ultimate is, which is going to be hard to track, is the impact on the individuals.
Yeah.
Have you looked at that or ways of tracking it?
So I think this is, when we look at suicide prevention in the whole, there is no one panacea. It is really a multifaceted approach, and we know that from all of the literature. So for us to be able to capture or say that this is having that impact, we're not in a position to say that. But what we are in a position to do is communicate the impact it has on the learner at that time.
Who's your primary target audience?
Indeed,
okay.
Precisely.
Well, look, I'm just so delighted that you got recognised at the awards, and thank you so much for joining us and telling us more about it. We will keep an eye on you. We want to hear what happens next, because I know you've got more plans. Is that right, for the future?
We do. We intend to expand the current programme, but we also tend to expand in terms of moving into the space around self-harm as well, because there is an appetite for this, and it's a gentle way to introduce people into a topic and into a space that it can be, like, it's sensitive, right? It's loaded with emotion. So we need to continue on that journey in a very sensitive and informed way by our lived experience experts.
Well, I think anyone who's thinking of going on this journey or anything similar has got to get in touch with you.
Please
because
do.
you've learned so much from it. But look, thank you so much for joining us, Aisling and Ailish, and we will see you again, I hope, back on Transform Gov. Now, don't forget, if there's new things happening, please enter this year. We're open for entries for the 2026 Ireland eGovernment Awards. Closing date is the 22nd of May. Register online as soon as possible through our website, digitalgovawards.com. If you register, you can save your entry and just have a draft in there and then go back and fix it and fiddle with it and add new documents until the 22nd of May. So that's it from us on Transform Gov. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please share it with your colleagues. And there's plenty more episodes. It's number 71, I think, that we're on now. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Transform Gov.